So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and as you can see, Judy Gregerson is back. So, Judy, welcome.
Hi, nice to be back.
Mhm. Um, Judy, in our last interview, I remember you talked about that it took a while before somebody approached you and said, you are not mentally ill. You are having demonic attacks. And I was wondering, have you ever encountered a person that had a hard time to accept that this could have to do with some entities that are giving him or her a hard time, or that completely rejected the idea?
Well, it's interesting because right now on the web, on YouTube, and in a lot of podcasts, there's been a tremendous amount of talk about negative entities
Mm,
within the Christian world, within the New Age world, within um, the secular world. 20 years ago, I don't think people would have believed it. I don't think people would have accepted it. But it's talked about so much in places other than Christianity. Christianity has always talked about this, they've always known it. But now it's talked about in a lot of places. So I find that by the time people find me, they've been exploring through a lot of things online. They probably have run into Jerry Marzinski or a guy named Brian who does a podcast called uh, Demon Erasers. And so they're aware. So I don't really get anybody who's not aware that it's demonic. Pretty much everybody comes to me, well, they'll write me and say, I've got some problems going on. I've got some spirits, I've got some demons. So people seem to be pretty aware of it now. I don't see anybody who's not aware.
mhm.
So that's a whole different world than it was when I was schizophrenic. Nobody had a clue. Nobody had a clue how to deal with it. Even in the Christian world, I didn't run into anybody at that time. I'm sure there were people that were doing deliverance, but I had no access. There was no internet. There was no way of finding these people that I knew of. So very different world for me because I had to go through a whole process and before I even found out that the last part of my healing was getting rid of these demons. People are much more fortunate today because there's much more out there. I think also there's a lot more evil out there. People have recognized and are beginning to see that there is evil that is running around this world and running this world
And running
where,
amok.
and running amok, where 20 years ago it wasn't so evident. But it's been so exposed in the past 5 years that people are very aware. They're very aware of the demonic influences. And some, different groups call them different things. They're called watchers, or they're called jinn, or they're called, spiritual entities, or egregores, or every group has a name for them.
Mm. Yeah. Egregore, isn't that more like a thought form that then manifests on the, let's say, astral plane?
I was doing some reading about it yesterday because somebody had sent an email to a gal I know who does mace, and he was talking about him. So I did I'd never heard the word before, so I looked it up, and it explained it as, yeah, thought, but also an entity. So
Yeah.
I don't fully understand that. Um, I don't understand that paradigm at all. I was kind of lost in it because it's a whole different discipline than what I'm used to. So yeah, but there's different names. People call them different things.
I think the way it works is, let's say people make up a brand new religion, yeah, and they pray to a certain God, yeah.
Mhm.
There is, and this energy, if enough people keep giving this thought, this new God, goddess, whatever energy, it will manifest on the astral plane sooner or later. That is, I think, how it works.
I think that they're always there looking for a place to manifest. I
Hmm.
think they're always in the background. They're opportunists. I mean, I deal with demons all the time with people. They're opportunists, they're liars. They lie to people. I had a client recently who I was doing deliverance with him, and I could see that he had such a block to getting free. And I finally said to him, I said, I think that you have a lying spirit, and here's what I think they're telling you. I think they're telling you that you will never be free because you cannot live without your addictions and the things that you do that to cope. And they've convinced you that you have got to do these things because life without them is not livable for you. And his mouth dropped open. He says, "How do you know? How do you know that?" He says, "Exactly what they tell me." I said, "Because I deal with demons all the time. I know what they tell people. I know what they say. I know how they affect them. They travel in groups, and I said to him, your problem is you have doubt. You have doubt in your mind and in your heart. They know that. They sift you. They found that. And so they come and tell you what feeds your doubt. And it feeds your doubt. And so you believe them. And he was shocked because he couldn't believe they had that much power over him. But they did. And I said, you've got to deal with your doubt. When you get rid of your doubt, they will go. There'll be no place for them. They can't manifest if
Mm,
you don't have that doubt there. And he was just shocked. He was really shocked because he was so trapped. He didn't understand why he was trying. He didn't understand the dynamics of how they work.
mm.
So yeah, that was
So,
that.
did I understand that correctly? He had some addiction issues? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he had three addiction issues.
Mm,
And these, lying, and I said to him, they're lying spirits. They're lying to you. They're telling you, that you will never make it without them. I said, why do you believe that? There's plenty of people on the earth that make it without three addictions and have a happy, full life. Why are you not entitled to that? Because they tell them that no, you can't have that. You'll never be free. You can't live without this. And he had never really examined that part of his thinking because they do work in thoughts. They do place thoughts, and they place thoughts usually around people's, their doubts, their fears, their weaknesses, their character flaws. Wherever there's any kind of weakness, that's where they manifest. That's why I was saying they're always looking for a place to fill.
mm. And but he overcame this?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Nope. I
Okay.
said I sent him home. I said, go work on your doubt. Go work on that. Go think it through. Figure out why you have to doubt. What is that about? Why don't you deserve a good life? Where does that go? Think about that, and then he'll come back and we'll work on that a little bit. Because I work with people over a period of months, going into a year now with some people, because getting free of this stuff, demons just don't come and oppress and reside. I think I'm more of his attachments than possession. I think there is such a thing as full possession. I think it's rare, but they're more attachments. They come and they attach to a part of us. And so it's easy enough for me to get rid of that. The hard part for people is to rebuild their thinking, rebuild their life. Um, a lot of people after deliverance, I take them through MACE because MACE is a program that's very good of getting rid of triggers, um, getting rid of trauma, getting rid of negative thoughts and patterns. And so sometimes after deliverance, we'll do MACE, and that will clear a lot of the emotional because deliverance will take care of the spiritual. But when I get somebody who's had demonic influence in their life for a long time, their thinking has been to some level ruined. because these entities are negative. Everything about them is negative. They don't tell people anything positive, except for, and this is interesting, except for the kind that come that give people gifts. They give them the gift of prophecy. They give them the gift of being able to see something. I had one gal that I talked to who she had spirits that would tell her when her husband was cheating on her and where he was. And she would check up on it and it would be true. And so she began to take notes, everything that they were saying to her. And I said to her, if you're going to have a relationship with them, I can't get rid of them for you because you've invited them to stay because you want to have this relationship with them. And so for her, another block to really getting her free. And a lot of people do establish relationships with their demons. I had another guy who was completely overtaken, and his demons told him that he didn't need to get married. He didn't need to have anything that anybody else had because he had them. And they would make him laugh. They would tell him jokes. They would fill his life and then tell him you don't need anything else. You just need us. We love you. So there's those kind that come with quote goodness. They're good, they trap people with the gifts. I consider them gifts. And then there's the kind that come and just oppress and make a person a miserable being because they're nasty, foul things. So two different kinds.
Mm. But I would assume that even those that come in with, the deception of goodness
Mm-hmm.
and even, yeah, a little bit entertaining and then things that are actually true, they give you that. Um, I would assume that sooner or later there is a price to be paid. Yeah, even if everything, let's say for 2 years, everything is positive
Mm-hmm.
with these entities. Yeah, they never lied to you, and
Mm-hmm.
it was even a funny experience, maybe. But I'm pretty sure sooner or later the Big Bang will come.
Well, the Bible says they come to kill, steal, and destroy.
Mm.
So even the good ones, when they come, they've stolen something. Every person I work with that I do deliverance, and some people call that exorcism. I don't call it exorcism because I don't believe in full, what I see is not full demonic possession. It's attachments, it's a form of possession, but a person I don't think can be fully owned. That's rare. Parts of them, parts of their mind, parts of their soul can be owned. But what was I saying? I got myself off on a track.
When they come in with
Oh, yeah. So they come in, so they always steal something. And
Mhm.
the first thing they steal, there's two things that they want. They want a person's identity. That's the first thing they'll go after. I meet a lot of people with mental illness. Their identity becomes I am mentally ill. They steal their identity. The second thing they steal is a person's destiny, their future, the plan for their life, for a good, full life. They will steal that, but they'll take the identity first and they'll take it in little bits and pieces from people. And I see that all the time, which is why after deliverance, people have to rebuild their identity. You know,
What does that look like when they steal the identity? How do I have to envision that?
well, when I was schizophrenic,
Hmm.
they convinced me because I didn't know back then it was demons. They convinced me that I was crazy, which was the one thing in life I feared the most because my mother had had a breakdown. So that was my weakness. That was the one thing I feared. That was the first thing they went after. I was crazy. I believed that my mind was shattered, that I was broken. I was beyond fixing. Even the psychiatric community told me I was beyond fixing. They really believe that there's no escape, there's no healing, there's no freedom from this. So my identity became I am mentally ill. My life is gone. You know, the first couple of years of that were bad enough, but when I reached about year three and I realized I had no future, I had absolutely no future, and that's when the ideas of suicide came in because I realized there's no future. I'm not going to win this battle. I'm going to end up dead. Either something is going to kill me or I'm going to have to kill myself to escape because there was no escape from this. So they totally convinced me that I was somebody I wasn't, that I was broken, shattered. And I did have some brokenness in me, mind you. I did have some shattering of my soul with all the trauma I've been through there. So there was partial truth to that, but they made it my whole being. And they convinced me that I was destroyed. I've had people come to me that tell me they are too broken to be fixed. That's a completely stolen identity. I've had people come to me who have lost probably most of their soul and most of their will because they've given it over to demonic forces. They don't have enough left in them to get free. You've got to have some will, you've got to have some of your soul there to fight, to make choices, to get rid of this stuff. If you can't make those choices, you can't get free. But that's rare. I've seen one person in that position.
Who gave him or herself over?
He gave himself over. He was a schizophrenic who decided that he wanted to go to South America and do ayahuasca.
Oh yeah. Mm.
So I've talked to a guy who was a missionary, a friend of mine in Africa. He dealt with deliverance there and a lot of demons all the time. And he dealt with witch doctors. And he told me, and because I asked him, what really goes on when you do ayahuasca or one of those drugs? And he said, well, he said, the witch doctors told me that when they go into that realm, which is the second heaven, when they go into that realm, they go in quickly, they make their bargain for whatever they want. They give whatever they have to give to get whatever they want, and they get out quickly. He said, because they know that those spirits are dangerous, they're cunning, they're sly, and they don't trust them, but they know they have power and they have to go to them to get power. So I said to him, well, what about this guy I'm dealing with? He says, he made a bargain. He gave something to them. And I said, well, I don't know what that is. He said, ask him what he gave them. So I asked him, I said, when you did ayahuasca and you went in, what did you offer for what you wanted? He wanted to be healed of schizophrenia. What were you willing to give? And he goes, I don't remember. I said, I think you told them whatever it takes because they took everything. So when he came down from that ayahuasca trip, they had taken his memory, they had taken his emotions. He had absolutely no emotional affect. He talked like a robot, and they had taken his will. And
Whoa.
he went back to the US from South America, and he was not even the same person. He talks like a robot. He doesn't hardly remember the last 10 years. They took everything. He bargained, didn't realize what he was doing, and he gave it all to him.
Whoa.
That's a nasty, lousy trip. That's the extreme. That's the very extreme though that I've seen.
And that happened during a ayahuasca session? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, with ayahuasca, you have very positive experiences, even in terms of physical healing sometimes.
Mhm.
But then again, you have experiences that are really, really gruesome and horrible. And I think, okay, if you're an adult, you have to decide for yourself if you want to go down that road or not. But if people decide that, there are a lot of, how should I put this, tricksters who do these sessions, but actually they might have attachments themselves. Yeah.
Mhm.
And some of them have no idea how to properly guide somebody through the experience. Yes, they know how to brew it, but that's basically it. And that can be, yeah, it can go either way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the most extreme case that I've ever heard of. I've run into other people who did ayahuasca and had no bad outcome from it.
Mm,
I see both sides of it. That was very, very extreme.
yeah,
But that's a good picture of how they come to steal your identity. I mean, that's an extreme picture of it, but it's a picture of it. And a lot of the women that I work with, when they come and they get deliverance, they really have to build. I work with them to help them rebuild their identity. Who are they really? Who are they? Do they really have a future? I mean, these are things that they have to think about. They've got to build themselves back. And in Christianity, we do a thing called renewing of the mind, which is very interesting because science has finally caught up with it. Brain plasticity has
mhm,
finally caught up. The idea that you can break strongholds in your mind by bringing positive thought. And for a Christian, you bring scripture, which is positive, and you exchange the scripture for your negative ideas and thoughts about yourself. And brain plasticity has proved it works. It works. If you continually bring the positive in, the negative breaks down. It breaks down the neural connections. It's the same as somebody who has, say, a porn addiction,
mhm,
which porn, it changes the mind, it changes the brain, it creates new pathways. So the person who's done porn long term will not find sex with a woman or a man as satisfying as porn.
mhm,
Porn rewires the brain for that. It takes 90 days of no porn to begin to break those neural connections and to get back to normal. So it's the same with any kind of, negative thought, any kind of negative pattern. And the people that I meet have a lot of strongholds. Most of them have some type of trauma, but I think everybody has some kind of trauma
yeah,
in their
sure.
life. Everybody suffers.
Mm. Yeah, the witch doctors in Africa. I talk a lot about Africa, but usually on my Patreon page. And I observe a lot what is going on, probably because I was married to a Kenyan.
Mhm.
And so I always kept an interest in this continent. And what I do know, we recently had in Uganda, we had in January general elections. And during that time, a documentary was released and they investigated witch doctors. And the witch doctors said that during campaign time, that a lot of politicians come
Mhm.
and
For
uh,
power.
yeah, and even pay them to kill an opponent.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
It's
he explained, yeah, I can do this and that. Do you want him just sick or do you want him out of the way? He will definitely die. I can do that. This is so and you have to pay that amount. And then when I delved into that subject, and I think for Africa that is a huge obstacle, the entire witch doctor thing. And I stumbled on a short video of an African gentleman, a younger one, and he elaborated in that video a little bit and said, guys, you are all complaining about your living standard and why nothing is going forward here. But so many people in Africa are dabbling in witchcraft, and you use the witch doctors. And do you really think there is any blessing to that? So he said the fact, of course, there are other factors, but he said that Africa has to grow up and dump that nonsense.
Well, the missionary that I was talking to that I know, he was over in Togo, I think, for 10 years. And he said that when you go into a village, eh, and he said the African people were really interesting because they think as a group. He said they don't have trauma the way Westerners do because when there's trauma, they deal with it as a tribe and they bring it out in the open so that nobody's left alone. Where in America you have trauma, it's like the world goes on, and probably the same in Europe. The world goes on, and you're like, whoa, you know. But in Africa, he said they don't leave anybody behind in trauma. They work it out as a group. He said so. These people don't have tremendous amount of trauma. He said, but when as a missionary he went in and preached the gospel to them, when these people got saved, he said it wasn't just one. He said the whole tribe would get saved because they think as a group, they think as a clan or a family. But he also said the other thing that was really interesting about Africa was that every person who got saved and became a Christian had to go through deliverance because they had all these ancestral spirits and all these spirits that they'd been using in their life because that was their religion and they were attachments. And he said you'd have to go through, deliverance with these people. And he said, and it worked out really well. He said it was much easier in Africa to get rid of this stuff because these people knew, the Africans knew these were spirits. They knew what they'd been dealing with. They knew what they'd been worshiping. They knew the effect they had in their life. He said, Westerners, they don't understand what they're dabbling in. They don't understand these things, how they get in their lives. They don't understand idols, what idols are, which could be many, many, many different things, not just a spirit, it could be anything. He said, but the Africans, they knew exactly what it was.
Mm.
And so I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that is, I know that my husband, shortly after I met him, his parents at that time they were already dead, and he insisted that his father died because of black magic.
Hmm.
Mm.
Well, here's a story for you. I had a friend many years ago who got involved in witchcraft. She became a witch and she had a stepfather she didn't like. So she put a curse on him.
Mm.
Some spell put a curse on him to kill him. Within a day or two, he had a heart attack or a stroke. And it shook her so bad to realize the power that she had thrown at him that she repented and turned away from it. She said, I don't want that kind of power. That isn't good. I think, she was kind of fooling around with it, thinking, oh, I'll curse him. Maybe he'll die. And when she realized what the power was and what she was doing to him, she was like, oh, I'm done. And she walked away from it. There's a guy in New York City called John Ramirez, and he was a warlock, and he claims, one of Satan's generals in that area. And he talks about putting curses on people to kill them. It was not a big deal. And he was raised by a family that had been into witchcraft for years, generations. So he came up in that and was dedicated to Satan when he was a very young boy. And he received power and then he received more power. And you get more power through blood. That's how you get power. The exchange is blood.
Mm-hmm.
It
What
takes
what is his name?
John Ramirez.
John Ramirez. That
Yeah,
sounds a little bit Latin America or South America.
he was Puerto Rican.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Puerto Rican. And yeah, so he's a Christian. He tells his story about, all of what he was involved in and what he did and how he got out, why he got out. And he had a very difficult time getting out. He had a tremendous amount of spiritual attacks because he left. They came after him for a long, long time, unrelenting, because he was a top general. His job was to take spirits into neighborhoods and assign them to cause drug addiction, to cause marital problems, to cause crime. Because these spirits, they all have an assignment. They have assignments. When I work with people who who have had a lot of demonic influence in their life, you can see, and they're named basically according to their assignment. People say, "Oh, a spirit of fear." Well, it's not a spirit of fear. It's a spirit who causes fear. It's called a spirit of fear because it causes it. But that's their assignment is fear. There's assignments of fear. There's lying. There's addiction. There's all kinds of things, and they have assignments, so they go out. And the way John Ramirez explains it is that there is a council in the second heaven. There's a hierarchy of these things, and they have councils, and they decide what havoc, like you were talking about earlier, the havoc they've brought on this earth. They're given assignments to go into certain areas and do things. And so when I work with people, I can see what the assignment has been in their life, and I can break that in the name of Jesus Christ. I can break that assignment, and they have to go. And there have been times when I've had people that I'm doing deliverance on, and I have a spirit that won't go. And if I ask it what its assignment is and what legal right it has to be there, it will tell me. The person will speak without even realizing that they're speaking, and they'll tell me what legal right they have to be in a person's life because they cannot come in without a legal right.
Hmm.
It's a it's a it's a it's
And,
a
what do they call a legal right? That is interesting. How do they defend that?
the legal right. There's a lot of things. There's generational sin.
Hmm.
There's generational curses. There's just plain old sin. Um, there's trauma. For some reason, they're able to get in through trauma, weakness, sickness, accidents. I have a young woman I work with who had a traumatic brain injury, and they got in through that traumatic brain injury, no fault of her own. We've had the hardest time getting them out. I don't quite understand with her exactly what's going on. Some people come and I have two people that are very, very complex with whatever is the spiritual realm is dealing out to them. Um, some people are very simple. They come, you get rid of stuff, they're happy, they leave, they go on with their lives. It depends on their degree of demonization and their degree of trauma and pain or accidents, whatever. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of things.
But how is that a legal justification? I don't get it. Maybe I'm too stupid.
Um, how is it a legal justification? I don't know that I fully understand it, except for the spiritual realm there are spiritual laws. God is a righteous God. He does not bless sin. So sin to me is very clear. If you're a Christian, when you sin, you take yourself out from underneath God's protection. There's the legal right. They go in.
Ah,
So
okay, okay, now I get it. But wouldn't you say that when we have a long, hard, whoops, a long, hard look at our world today,
mhm,
that the sinners are running the show and actually they are doing very well, most of them. And some of them, especially in the higher echelons of politics, economics, and what have you,
mhm.
they will get away with it.
Well, and a lot of them, we're seeing a lot of them are Satanists.
Mm.
They are Satanists at the highest levels. They are. And yeah, they're doing very well. That won't last forever. An end will come to that. You know, I don't understand why if somebody has like this gal I work with who has a traumatic brain injury, I don't understand why that's an open door. There's a lot I don't understand. I haven't studied as a discipline. I haven't studied demonology, so I don't understand it, but I know it exists. I see it. I see it in people, who have accidents or weakness. I think too, here's another thing that happens when people, and this may explain part of it. When people have an accident or they, like this gal had a traumatic brain injury, she immediately after her brain injury started having spiritual attacks and she didn't understand it. And she kind of received it. She kind
Mm.
of let it in because she didn't understand what it was. It piqued her curiosity. You know, she was being told, hearing she needed to read this and she needed to read that. She needed to get involved in these different occult things and examine these different occult things. And she was lured into it when she was weak. So there's some level there of permission. Like when I became schizophrenic, I remember the moment I became schizophrenic, I was stoned out of my mind. I've been
Hmm.
smoking pot. I walked through what I thought was a portal that I'd been invited into. I pictured this in my mind, this door, and I went in willingly. And when I went in willingly and shut the door, I was trapped. But I was deceived, but I was trapped. So, I don't understand everything about that, but I knew that I know now looking back that by walking through that door, being enticed, I gave permission. So there's a lot of deception out there. These things are very clever. They're very smart. They're very deceitful. Even the witch doctors know that. And I asked this missionary from Africa, I said, so if they don't want to stay long with those spirits, what do they do? He told me that they take antipsychotic drugs, antidepressants, SSRIs, that brings them quickly out of the second heaven. I said, well, that's really interesting. Yeah, they use mental health drugs to pull them quickly out of that realm. Now, how that works, I don't understand. But he said that's what they do. That's what they told him that they do to get quickly out of there.
Mm. With that brain injury, what I could imagine, I think that these demons, entities, whatever you want to call them, do not exactly stick to their own legal framework to the T. I
Mhm.
guess they saw an opportunity, a vulnerability at that particular moment when the injury happened, and they took that as a justification.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. They're very cunning and they are opportunists.
Mhm.
They're looking for any opportunity. How did they get in? They tempt us. They suggest, why don't you do this? Why don't you think about that? They lure people in when they're vulnerable, and then people open the door.
Mhm.
When I do deliverance on people, the first thing I do is have them fill out a lot of forms so I can find out what are all the open doors. How did these things get in? Because if you get rid of the open door, if you close that door by renouncing ever having opened it, they have to go. There are some people I take them to deliverance before they come in. Their prayers I have them say to forgive everybody that they've ever had a problem with, to renounce any generational sin or curses, to renounce Freemasonry if they've had family involved in that, to renounce sin, whatever. So by the time they come into a session with me, they've gone through that part. And sometimes I just start praying for them and these things just start leaving without me telling them to leave because they know the party's over. The
Mhm.
doors are closed, they know they're going. And with some people, they'll just start leaving.
Mhm. But why would generational sin be a justification? I mean, if somebody has, let's say, a parent that becomes a murderer or, a child trafficker or whatever, the shock of that is, yeah, it depends on how well your constitution, your psychological constitution is. But why would that justify to attack, let's say, a daughter or a son who has nothing to do with it?
I think that in families, when there is generational sin,
Hmm.
there are family patterns of belief and family patterns of behavior family patterns of addiction. That's why if you look at a family, the grandfather was a drunk, the father was a drunk, and then the son's a drunk. Why? Because there's some kind of learned behavior. But it's interesting because the Human Genome Project discovered that in the genes, they can look at the genes of people, they can tell you who's a liar. They can tell you, they can actually locate sin in the genes because sin causes some type of mutation in the gene, I guess. They can pick out a murderer just by looking at the genes. So there's something generationally that passes, whether through the genes, through behavior, through thoughts, through patterns. So that I think creates a vulnerability. Doesn't mean that that person is going to be affected by it. Some may not. I mean, if you look at, say, you look at a family of four kids with two alcoholic parents, are they
Mm,
all going to be messed up? They're all going to have a different reaction to it. It just depends on their personality, their vulnerabilities, whatever.
mm,
So I think it creates a vulnerability. It's like generationally, like diseases that pass genetically. Not everybody will get that disease. My family, my father got colon cancer at 61. My sister got colon cancer at 61. And I went for colonoscopy when I was 59, and I had like 15 polyps that would have gone to cancer by the time I was 61.
mhm,
So I had them removed, and then when I went for colonoscopy when I was later, like 5 years later, I had no polyps. And my doctor said to me, "This is really interesting." He said, "Because in your family, apparently colon cancer happens at the age of 61." He said, and if you hadn't had those out, you would have had cancer by the time you were 61. He said, and now that that vulnerability is gone because you have no more polyps. He said, that's really interesting how genetics work that way.
mm,
Now, my other sister, well, she died before she was 61. My brother never had cancer. My other brother didn't have colon cancer at 61. So it doesn't, these things don't pass to everybody. I think there's a genetic vulnerability or a spiritual vulnerability, but not everybody gets it.
mhm. Yeah. So you wrote a book, or are you still in the process of writing it?
I've just finished one. I wrote a book. It's called Chains Off, Before, During, and After Deliverance. And I haven't put it into print yet. I have it on my website, which is strategiesforovercomers.com. Because I get a lot of requests from all around the world of people looking to do deliverance, but they don't understand what it is, what it requires, um, and what it will take. So I put this book together. It's a short book. It's only about 60 pages to give people a real overview of it. I have another book. It's called The Terrible Years, which was about being a schizophrenic and then what it took to overcome that. That's in print. That's on Amazon. I have another book called What I Learned in the Pit, was things that I learned through a 4 or 5 year period of being extremely sick and nearly dying and being almost fully handicapped until God healed me in 2024. And so it's a book about that. And all those they can learn about on my website. And there's more on my website about deliverance, and there's more about MACE, which is something we haven't talked a lot about, which would be interesting to cover too, because MACE is a therapy that's really beginning to get people are really beginning to hear about it. It started in Australia like 25 years ago, and it's finally crossed the Pacific, and it's growing in the U.S. and more people are training and crossed into Europe, and a lot of that because of Jerry Marzinski. And you know Jerry, you've had Jerry
Yeah,
on your
yeah, yeah, yeah,
show.
many times. Um, we know about the portals that are alcohol, drugs, or even child abuse can be a portal.
Hmm.
Um, Have you ever looked at the possibility if somebody has real world parasites, meaning via eating or drinking, all of a sudden you have parasites in your body? And have you ever investigated if there is a link between real parasites and entity attacks?
I haven't.
Mm.
I haven't. I've heard a lot, kind of like in the background about spiritual parasites and about parasites, but I've never made a connection. Have you? Have you read anything on it that's interesting?
I wouldn't say that I'm expert on it, but I could imagine that there is a connection, and be it ever so slightly, um, because most people do not even know they have parasites. It's relatively easy to do a, parasite cleanse,
Hmm.
um, but I think if you are full, if you really have a lot of that, then most likely your immune system is down. Yeah, like with the lady who had the brain injury.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you have that weakness. You are probably more often sick than other people. And I could imagine that they would use that as a portal as well.
Yeah, I could too. I've never run into it. It's never come up in the work that I do, but I could see that because that would create a vulnerability, would
Mhm.
create a health vulnerability. And they're always looking for weakness.
Yeah.
And they sift us. They know who we are. They watch us. There are what's called familiar spirits. There are spirits that have come down through families. They know families. They know what grandma did. They know what great grandma did, great grandpa. They know all the family history. They sift us. They know us really well. So they know exactly what we may bite on that they can throw at us, what we might receive, what they might suggest to us that we go, maybe that's a good idea, thinking it's our own thought. They know that. They know us. I think they know us better than we know ourselves in a lot of instances.
Mm.
They are very good at capturing people and getting people to make themselves captured, put themselves in a position so they can be captured, giving their permission in a sense.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to a Catholic exorcist? I mean, the
No,
Catholic Church has exorcists, yeah. So, do you think that is a good method?
I've watched Father Rippinger. Have you heard of him?
No.
He's an American exorcist, probably the biggest one in America.
Mm.
He's a fascinating man. His information is fascinating. I love listening to him. They've been doing exorcism for a long time. They've collected a tremendous amount of information from demons and about demons. That's really fascinating. It's beyond my realm, but they're also dealing with people who have severe possession, real full possession. That's where those people tend to go, I think. And they have people that levitate when they're doing exorcisms on them. And so I find them very interesting. I disagree with some of their ideas. When I listen to them, I couldn't name one now for you, but basically, I think they're doing a good work.
Mm.
And they're now training more exorcists in America. Father Rippinger says that there's so much demon possession now they can barely keep up, and they've had to train more and more people. But he said to train an exorcist in the Catholic system takes years. They've got to be trained one on one, and it's a big commitment to get people through this training. And there aren't that many in America that are really, really good at it, but they're trying to build them up so that every diocese has one. That's what they're trying to get to because they're seeing so much more of this and the need for it.
Mm. Um, yeah, I have to say, uh, don't get me wrong, I'm not doubting that this particular priest is doing good work there.
Hmm.
But in general, when I look at the Catholic Church as an institution
Hmm.
and with their dealings of abuse and what have you, the
Hmm.
institution, I'm not attacking Catholics here, but the institution itself,
Hmm. It's
to
very corrupt.
me, has very demonic traits.
Oh yeah. There's people who write about that and talk about that there is like a deep state in the Vatican and in the church. There is all this abuse. I've looked at the documentaries they've done on the exposure in America of all the abuse of these priests and how the church protected them and moved them from church to church and how they covered it in their documents so that if you looked at the document where a priest was, why he'd been moved, you would never know why. And they were moving them around the country, knowing full well that they were abusing boys. So there's a huge homosexual element that's embedded deep in the church and child abuse
Mm,
element deep in the church and in the Vatican.
yeah.
On the other hand, there is another side of the church. There are those, from what I see, and I'm not a Catholic, but there are those who are solid, good Christians in there trying to do the right thing and fighting up against this system all the time.
Mm,
So yeah, I think Father Rippinger is one of the good guys, but I agree with you. There's there's a lot of nasty stuff in that system that
mm,
they allowed and that they perpetuated
yeah.
for years and hidden for years and years and years and lives that they've destroyed.
Yeah. So I would think, therefore, honestly, when I think of the Vatican, that to me is modern Babylon.
Hmm.
Yeah. That is even when I, let's say for you're a tourist somewhere, when I enter, I get a bad vibe when I enter a Catholic church.
Hmm. That's interesting.
And I know that is not the case for everybody, and that is okay, but I don't feel comfortable there. And I am,
Were you raised Catholic?
no, I was not raised in any religion.
Mm.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. That's why I said there were things that Father Rippinger says that I disagree with, because I disagree with some of their doctrine. The whole Vatican thing, the Vatican is a mess. I mean, the Vatican just opened up a room for Islamic prayer. What place does that have in Christianity? There's a whole separate religion. They're trying to blend.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're trying to lead to the formation of the one world religion
Mm-hmm.
for the one world order, and the Catholic Church is trying to be the leader in that. I see a lot of the Protestant leaders in America go to the Pope. That's like uh, that's a bad picture. It's a really bad picture. But I think that they are going to head the formation of the one world church. And I think this current Pope is well on his way
Mm.
to doing that.
Yeah. What I also find disturbing is that sometimes, and it doesn't matter, you know, we have in many religions an eschatology, yeah, the grand finale. So, and you find that in Islam, you find that in Christianity, that people sometimes think they, through their actions, can hasten that plan of God. And I find that so arrogant. Yeah. For instance, I saw this one pastor when after um, October 7th happened, and he gave a, yeah, not a lecture. I don't even know what to call it, but in his speech, he called for, wiping out Gaza completely, turn it into a parking lot, and then we built the third temple, and that way we are going to usher in the Antichrist, and then at some point Jesus has to show up, yada yada yada. And I listened to him and I thought, you idiot. If
Mhm.
there is a plan, there is a plan. And you, little carbon entity, cannot hasten that. And we have that in the Islamic world as well, that people think the more chaos they produce,
The
then,
quicker the
yeah,
quicker the Mahdi will come.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree with you on that. There's a lot of, in all over the world, there's a movement called an New Apostolic Reformation. It took over the charismatic churches. They're dominionists. They believe they've got to take dominion of the world, and then they can hand the world to Christ that's been Christianized, so that Christ can return. It's baloney. Paula
yeah,
White, who's the faith advisor at the White House, is one of those people. She's a false prophet. And so Trump's got a false prophet advising him in the White House, which is like just what he needs. And so the Dominionists, they talk about the seven mountain mandate. They're going to take over all the, education, government, um, business, arts. I forget what all the seven are. And that's how you recognize them. If they start talking about the Seven Mountain Mandate, those are dominionists. And they plan to take over the world. Pretty scary stuff. And they call themselves Christians. They go under that banner. And that's why there's a lot of talk about Christian nationalists. And I think that's a lot of who they're talking about are those people, who want to take over America and the world. And it's so absurd to me. I mean, it's so crazy. Jesus didn't tell us to take over the world.
no,
No, he told us to preach the gospel, heal the sick, cast out demons, and disciple all nations. He didn't tell us to fight against the government. He didn't tell us to do a whole lot of things that people are all whipped up into right now. He didn't tell us to make a god out of our president, which a lot of Christians have done in America. Trump is their god. He's going to save America. Yeah, well, yes, while he builds the beast system with Palantir, okay, so that he can lead the beast system in the world and beat the other countries so they can be the leader in it. This is our savior. It's like, wake up, wake up.
yeah.
It's crazy stuff.
But you find that in a lot of people, and the frightening thing is it's popular. Yeah, and people seem to fall for that because when that particular pastor that I just mentioned, when he gave this speech, the people were beside themselves. They found it wonderful. And I thought, how can you fall for this nonsense?
Mhm. There's a lot of people out there, Judith, who don't think. They don't think. They especially don't think for themselves. There's
Yeah.
a lot of people who get involved in groupthink. Here's an example. When I was in college, there was a lot of protests going on against the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
And every May Day, they would have a march in Washington against the war. 1971, I was a freshman in college. I decided to go. I bought it all. Oh, we're going to protest against the war, blah, 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 blah. We go off to Washington, D.C. There's a big concert in the park by the Washington Memorial overnight. We sleep in the park. The next day we get up, we meet in Georgetown with the leaders, which was the SDS. They were socialists. I didn't realize that then. I was just excited about let's stop the Vietnam War. I'd gotten into the groupthink, the mass mind. I bought it. So they gave their whole speech, and we're going to march down, to Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House, and blah blah blah. Nixon was in office then. He was scared to death of the crowd. So we start marching, and Nixon gets paranoid and decides this is going to go bad. So Nixon calls out tanks He calls out riot police and he brings these people in and they start macing the crowd and beating people and pulling people out of restaurants. I got maced, ended up in a bus. I ended up in the DC jail with my friends. And guess what I learned when I was in jail? None of the leaders were there. They all got out of Washington, D.C. before the pot got hot. They riled us up, told us what to do, put us all into this mass mind. And when you get into a mass mind, you don't think about what you really think. You adhere to the group think. And I did. And so here I was in jail. So in jail we had Benjamin Spock, which was the baby doctor, and a couple of other famous people were there, but no leadership. And it took us 2 days to get out of jail. And we had the ACLU came and bailed us out. We finally got out of jail. I went back to college thinking, you know what? What a stupid idiot I was to buy into groupthink, to follow a movement because it was cool and because it was hip and because everybody was doing it and because it looked good, it sounded good, without really researching and finding out what I was getting into. I was getting into being manipulated by the socialists to create social unrest. And I went to jail for them, and they weren't there in jail. There were people in jail that were on acid, that were having bad trips because they ended up in jail. I mean, it was a mess. So the rest of my life, I have nothing to do with groups, absolutely nothing. Whatever's popular, I run in the opposite direction because it's really easy to pull people in.
But why the tanks and the riot police? Was the protest violent? Because if just let's say even if it is 500,000 people, if they just march peacefully, why attack them?
Because Nixon was afraid of them, the
Oh,
size
okay.
of the crowd, we were heading to the White House. He was afraid. He was really afraid. He was afraid of the power and what we would do. Most of us were a bunch of students. There was no violence. All we did was walk down the street and they came at us like put us into a war,
Hmm.
basically. He came at us. He wanted to put it down fast and hard and end it. He did not like it. And so he came down fast and hard. There's a documentary I found on that march, the May Day 71 march. It was the largest anti-war protest in the history of America. They arrested 20,000 people. 20,000 people they arrested. They were pulling little kids out of restaurants away from their parents, pulling people out of shops and arresting them, macing people on the street. It was unbelievable.
Hmm. And
So,
you thought you live in a democracy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it was probably one of the best experiences I ever had because I learned I will never allow anyone to do my thinking for me. I will not move on anything until I've thought it through. And that's why people say, "What do you think about this, that?" If I don't know, I just say, "I don't know," because I'm not gonna pretend that I'm something I'm not. And and there's a lot of things I don't know, like this whole anti-Semitism, this whole Zionist hatred thing that's going on. Somebody asked me about it. I said, you know what? I haven't looked into it. I don't really care about it. I don't know anything about it. I can't discuss it. If you want to be anti-Zionist, have at it. That's fine. But until I have the interest in knowing and learning about it, I can't even talk to you about it because I don't know because it's not that interesting to me because all these movements and these things, these protests, they pop up, and there are people who just pop in, they jump into the next thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It's the next thing,
Mm.
so I avoid the next thing
Yeah.
always. I don't want to know what the next thing is. I'm too old to care, you
Yeah,
know?
I support the current thing.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, and
well, that's
sometimes you have these the hatred for Trump and for Israel and whatever.
mhm.
It takes over. And then what I noticed, people start defending this murderous regime in Iran, yeah, and what they have done to their own people is beyond words. And I I cannot defend this regime. Would I have preferred that there wasn't a war? Yes, of course I would. But I cannot side with them. I cannot side with people that butcher their own citizens.
Well, it takes a lot of energy to hate.
Yeah,
If you look at the Trump thing in the US, I mean, the amount of hatred by regular everyday people toward him is so crazy. I don't have the energy. I just don't have that much in me to expend on hating somebody.
yeah,
I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't want Trump. I voted for Robert Kennedy because I liked him, even though he said don't vote for me because I'm going with Trump. I thought, nope, I'm voting for you. That's where how I want to vote. That's who I liked. But I don't have the energy to hate Trump. I don't have the energy to follow every slam, and some people do against him. It's like he's our president. He'll be gone in 3 years. He'll be gone. He'll be gone. There'll be somebody new that we can worry about. Somebody new for you to hate.
yeah.
I just can't go there with
Yeah,
people.
and you are correct. Really, going into hatred takes a lot of energy, and I need my energy for something else.
But
And
hate and anger have tremendous power. I have a client who got into being very angry at what happened to her, and I said, okay, so when you get into that anger and their hatred towards those people who abused you, who benefits from that? Do you benefit from it? Makes you feel powerful. It's like a weapon you can use, but the problem is it doesn't affect anybody but you. So who benefits from hatred and anger? Certainly not the person doing it.
yeah,
And somebody hates Trump, but what benefit is there? I don't get it, Judith. I just don't get it.
yeah.
You
You
know.
know, if you really have strong grievances because of abuse or whatever, I get it. I get it. And at some point, the emotions have to get out. And
Mhm.
okay, go for it.
Get
Let
them
it
out.
all out.
Yep.
Take an axe and hack some wood, scream
Mhm.
your head off or whatever. But there has to come a point you have to let it go. Otherwise, you are not even in the sense that everything is forgiven, but let it go in the sense that it does no longer dictate your life.
Mhm. Let yourself off the hook. That's really what you're doing.
Mm,
You're letting yourself off the hook. And I think, forgiveness for me is a way of saying, I'm not going to take revenge. I'm going to leave this to a higher power. The scripture says, God says, leave room for my wrath. I mean, he
mm.
actually says that, cut out the fighting and arguing and hating, leave room for my wrath. Basically, I'll take care of them. Kind of what goes around comes around. It's going to come around for them because God will exact justice in his way, in his time, which isn't always our way in our time. I think we expect things to be much quicker and much more expedient. God is much more patient, but what goes around comes around. It's like the law of karma. Your sin will find you out. That's what the Bible says. These people that are going around destroying lives, abusing children, it will come back on them. We may not see it, but it will come.
Yeah, I believe so too. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, you know, do some justice here.
Hmm.
Um, I think that is highly necessary. And I find it really irritating that, after the Epstein files, that actually nobody in the United States has been arrested, even for, an interrogation or something. Isn't that interesting?
Well, that tells you how involved everybody is.
Yeah.
They all protect each other. They all do. They're a little. I think the United States is like Rome was at the end of the Roman Empire. They are a law unto themselves. They are fully, completely corrupt, with few exceptions. They are all sold out. I mean, look at the quality of food in America. Look what they put in our food. Look what they're putting in our air all over the world. Look what they put into our water. Look how they polluted our earth. And yet nobody in Congress is stopping it. In fact, they're going to vote pretty soon on whether or not to allow Bayer to use glyphosate. And you know darn well they're going to vote to allow them to do that. They're not going to stop that. There's too much money to be made. You know, there's so much money to be made. And that's what those people are about: money and power, greed, corruption. I didn't think I'd ever live to see the day where every institution in America was corrupt. But here we are. I
Here
don't know
we
how
are.
here we are. I don't know how it is in Europe, but here you
Ah,
can you can't look anywhere but that it's not totally corrupt. That somebody is not grifting off somebody else or off the people. It's
mm,
everywhere, and it keeps getting exposed. It's like you go to bed at night thinking, well, it can't get any worse, and you wake up next day and it is.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, here in Europe, the voices against illegal mass migration are getting louder and louder because it's really creating havoc in the
Mhm.
countries. So now the EU, in their endless wisdom, is planning to label any type of criticism against mass migration as racism.
And I suppose then they'll throw you in jail.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, it was all planned. It's all designed. It was all created. It was on purpose to take down the Western world, so they can bring in their one world leader. It's all by design. I think people are beginning to see that. They're beginning, if you talked about this 25 years ago,
You were a
people,
nutter.
yeah, if you talked about a one world religion, a one world government. It's interesting because the Bible talks about the 10 kings who are not kings, who will rule the world at the end of the world. Here we are with all these technocrats and these billionaires. And then you got Trump with his, what's his new thing called? Uh, some new thing he put together that I think has 10 members, you know. But if you talked about this stuff, 25 years ago, people would think you were nuts. I started studying this stuff like in 1987. Before all this started, I read the UN charters, what the plan was for education, what the plan was for migration. All these plans were made back in the 70s and 80s. What the plan was to take down the richer countries, what the plan was to exploit South America and Africa for all their riches, to give them loans and then say, we want your oil, we want your minerals. This was all planned, it was all decided years ago. And it's like people say, well, this illegal immigration in the US, they've got to stop that. Well, I remember back in when George Bush Sr. was president in the US, there was a conference called the Gold Creek Conference. I had material on it. They decided at that conference that they were going to open the border between Mexico, the US and Canada. They were going to have a highway that went through. They were going to take so many immigrants. They were going to put so many of them through college. So the Mexicans come up here, they could get college. They were going to put them on Social Security, and they were going to let in anybody that wanted to come in. It was called the North American Agreement. It
Hmm.
was signed by George Bush, was never ratified in Congress, but it was decided that it was going to be. So people say to me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, why don't they stop this immigration? I said, because they decided they were going to have it. They signed on to it. This is what they want. And he was a Republican. So,
Yeah.
that kind of twists your head around. But I don't see the Republicans doing a whole lot. Well, Trump did, but I didn't see them doing anything when Biden was in office. Nobody was standing up much screaming about the border. There were a few, not many. But this stuff has all been planned. It's all engineered. It's all playing out the way they want to play it out. I'm just waiting for the next pandemic. What are they going to drop on us next?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we haven't seen the end of it. But maybe we will have energy lockdowns, you know,
Yeah, that looks
with
like it might be the
with
next one.
oil, so-called oil shortages and gas shortages.
Mhm.
And maybe that is the next thing that could come around the corner.
Well, that and famine. Since we can't get the fertilizer out of the
Mhm,
Middle East, and since Russia seems to be holding back, they're saying, what I'm reading is that they're saying that as early as this September, we could start having food shortages.
mhm.
That's a great way to get people under control.
Yeah, sure.
You either do what you want, we want you to do, or we just won't give you any food, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a crazy world to live in.
It sounds as if our leaders have a lot of attachments as well.
Yeah, I think they do.
Yeah.
I think they do. I think some more so than others, Judith.
Yeah. Definitely.
I
So,
think,
I thank you so much for coming. That was really an interesting talk. I'm very happy that we had it, Judy. And I wish you all the best with your books, with your work. And yeah, thank you for doing it.
yeah, and I was going to ask if you would put my website up,
Sure.
yeah, for me so people can find me there. Because
Yeah.
I do get emails from people over the world looking for mace or looking for deliverance or just looking for information about these things. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer
The
questions.
website, I will put that in the description box of the video. I always do that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, guys, that was it. Night flight for today with the wonderful Judy Gregerson, and we see you on the next one. And now I can't find the button again. Here it is.